Okay, so, the Pokemon Sword and Shield Pokemon models have been out there for a couple of days now, and it seems like just yesterday everyone got the news how similar they are to the 3DS models. I'll be getting to that in a moment, but first I want to go over one thing real quick, or I think it's mostly, it's two things. First, I want to go into what I consider to be part of the model, and what I consider to not be part of the model, because there seems to be confusion there. So one of the main things that I see people say that are part of the model, which are not, are the textures. And textures are obviously different. But these image textures have nothing to do with the actual model. They do affect the final results when it's rendered, but it's not actually directly linked to the model. They are just image files. So let me go ahead and pull up this real quick. So what I have here is the 3DS textures. And then here's the Let's Go textures and the Switch textures. They are all different, but they also are in the same layout, which suggests that they're the same, but I'll get into that. And there's not too much to say about this, honestly. It definitely shows that they didn't reuse textures from Let's Go. Let's Go had a different type of style to it, because they had to make textures that were more closely related to the 3DS textures, because that was the more shading style they're going for Sword and Shield. Let's Go had more of a natural look, I guess. I can't really describe it, but it's not cel shaded, so they have more subtle details. And Let's Go and 3DS and Sword and Shield are more similar because they have more similar shading styles. They're both cel shaded. Sword and Shield also has outlines. They aren't. It's not like an upscaled version of the 3DS textures. They actually did redo pretty much all of it entirely with thinner outlines. But the Sword and Shield textures follow very closely to what the 3DS did in terms of where the outlines are placed and all that, which is basically all the detail there is, just the outlines. The outline work is basically all the details there are, other than the actual color differences in certain parts of the body. The only other major difference is what they did with the margins, and let me get into the margins. So if I were to select the entire rig and show what the UVs are, there are margins that aren't within the area of where the models get the texture data from. Like, all this data here, where there's no polygons placed, they don't matter. Literally doesn't matter where they are, what kind of data they hold. Actually, kind of to an extent, they kind of do if there's some sort of margin bleed in the rendering, but other than, minute stuff like that, it generally doesn't matter what's in the margins, especially where the black area is. That especially doesn't matter. So that's why the margins don't matter. I'm not really considering the margin area here, like where this area is black here. Well, no, it's not here. It doesn't matter. It's not getting rendered at all. So yeah, ignore those parts. Anyway, what I do consider to be part of the model are the UVs themselves, actually. The UVs, not the texture, but the actual, the skinned mesh. I consider that to be part of the model. I consider Vertex Weights to be part of the model, so let me pull those up. Vertex Weights is what controls the deformations of the armature, so let me show a quick example of this. So you have this right paw here. Go ahead and rotate that down. And if we go into weight paint mode, and let's turn on wireframe just for the sake of clarity, you see that this... it's like that weight paint. There we go. So we have this heat map for the weight painting, and what's more red is closer to 1, and what's more blue is closer to 0. When it's 1, that means this bone has more power over its deformation. And the more blue it is, the less influence it has over its deformation. So obviously the whole body is blue, because the right paw doesn't actually move the whole body, it's just the paw. So it's just red here. So if I were to weight paint this area to 0, it would start to return the paw to its default position, because the paw, even though it's rotated, it has no influence over it anymore because it is now all blue. That's basically what weight painting is in a nutshell. And to an extent, I consider the armature to be part of the model. The actual, bones and stuff. To an extent. And finally, the wireframe itself is obviously part of the model. Like, the actual vertices and polygons, yeah, that's the model. I don't think anyone's going to argue about that one. Basically what I'm saying is, The fact that the models have different textures mean nothing. They're just image textures, image files. They aren't part of the model directly. So these image textures have nothing to do with the model. So these maps, like the ambient occlusion map, the emission map, which I'm actually not too sure what they're used for, the emission maps, they might be used for dynamaxing, maybe, but that's just speculation. The normal maps, everything in this folder, every image texture that's in this folder is not part of the model bit. They're just standalone image textures. So with that out of the way, let's go into the models themselves. Last time I was here, I actually compared the Vaporeon model from Let's Go, which was the same. And not surprisingly, this is the Sword and Shield model with the Sword and Shield textures, and the triangle counts down here, 5,540, matches up with the 3DS's 5,540 triangles. And if you were to enable wireframe mode, go into the side view here and select the 3DS model. And as you can see, the Sword and Shield model is perfectly obscuring the selection of the Vaporeon model in the back, the 3DS model. And if I were to move it slightly in the back, it starts to reveal itself. This is one of the easier ways to determine if the models change for me. Like this is a very quick and dirty, easy way to find out. Just align the models perfectly, the two different models from two different games, and then see if one model perfectly obscures the other. And it does. If I move it slightly, then everything just gets revealed, because it was perfectly obscured before. If you move it even slightly, it's just completely blown. So yeah, at least for Vaporeon, the models are the same. There's literally no difference with vertice placement or polygon placement or even the rotation of the quads. Sometimes I find that even though the models are the same, sometimes these areas here, have rotated edges like this. This I don't consider to be different. It's just how you triangulate the model when you export from the source file. But for this time around, unlike Let's Go, all the triangles are lined up perfectly. At least for this model. Oh, except for this part. There's a triangle here that doesn't line up perfectly. But it's just because it's flipped. The actual placements of the vertices are not different. I want to go over this vertice count here and why I don't think it matters. So if I go to the 3DS model, you'll see the vertice count is 2,929, and the vertice count for the Sword and Shield model is much higher at 3,755, and which is weird because the triangle count is still the exact same. And the reason for that is there we go. And the reason for that is because the Sword and Shield models, for whatever reason, are cut into segments. These models are like cut into little pieces. And what that does is that if I were to select this vertice here, you would think that there's one vertice here in this location, but there actually isn't. There's actually two. So when you split the model into segments, there's a lot of duplicate vertices. So if I were to select everything, go into merge by distance, the vertice counts should line up. So we have 2,929, 2,929. And that's after removing all the doubles. But when you export the models from the source files, they aren't connected, unlike the 3DS models. I don't consider this as a difference. The models are the same, it's just that one of them is cut into segments and one of them is not. I don't consider that a major difference at all. And it's also why vertex count just doesn't matter. When you compare these models, you want to focus on the triangle count. The triangle count is the main thing here. Okay, I think I went over everything I wanted to go over before I go into the models themselves. So obviously the Vaporeon model is the same. I already showed you guys that. Flareon is the same. So if I were to select Vaporeon, the 3DS model in the back, and go into wireframe, as you can see, everything's the same except for there seems to be a stray rotated face here, rotated triangles. So again, those don't matter that much. They were just rotated triangles. Like if I were just to do this and right click, no, not right click, press Control E, rotate, it just rotates like that. It rotates it along the quad. That's what that is. And those, again, just depends on how you triangulate model when you export the model. And there's another one over here. But anyway, as you can see, if I were to move the model slightly, everything gets revealed. But when I don't move the model and when it's perfectly aligned, it perfectly conceals everything except for the rotated stuff. And if I were to select everything, this is a 3DS model to the left, Triangles is 6,176. Triangle count, 6,176. Same. And Jotion's the same. Again, yeah, same thing except for the rotation thing here. I'll go over Eevee in a second. Espeon is the same except for rotations. Umbreon is the same except for rotations. So move it slightly. Yep. Leafeon is the same. I don't have every Pokemon yet, by the way. I have about 20. I'll probably look into comparing more models soon, but you'll see. It takes a lot of time to import all these models, let me tell you. Anyway, I'll go over Glaceon, Sylveon, Pichu, and Pikachu in a moment. They actually do have some differences I want to go over. Raichu. Raichu is the same, except this will be a theme with some of the other models too, with the 3DS models. If I were to go into material mode and show, there's actually like a duplicate part of the model that's like pushed out a little bit. And for Raichu specifically, it seems to be for the cheeks. I think this part is mainly just to make the cheeks emit, I think. I don't know. At least for the 3DS model, this was necessary to be there. So as you can see, the 3DS model, that part of the model is actually showing up. But if I were to delete this part and just leave what's underneath, they line up perfectly. So wireframe, there we go. So here's wireframe mode, and everything's selected. Other than this rotated triangle, everything's lining up very nicely. Moving it slightly, and yeah, you get the picture. And this will be a theme with a few of the other models. Most of the other models that I actually have are for the eyes and not the cheeks. Some Pokemon have like this extended mesh for the eyes, and if I were to delete those for those models, they'll line up too. So anyway, Vertex count 5,250. Vertex count for the Sword Shield model 5,250. Okay, so for Alolan Raichu we have 7,652 triangles, and for Sword and Shield we have 7,652. So we go into side view here, everything's lining up until I move it slightly. So I think you get the picture. I compared all of these models, and I can assure you that Arcanine, Machop, Machoke, Lucario, Ludicolo, Steelix, Weavile male, I don't have the female model from Sword and Shield yet, Wingull, and Gyarados are identical. The wireframes and vertice layout, vertice placement, I should say, is identical. So obviously they didn't redo models from scratch, which everyone's upset about. That's why it's trending. After all, it's kind of a mess right now. But it's not to say that didn't make changes here and there. Not everything's identical. There's some changes that are incredibly minor and some that are more major than others. So the first of those changes is actually Pikachu I want to go into. Here we have Pikachu, the 3DS model. And here we have the Sword and Shield model. And there's one big difference, is that we have a mouth mesh here in the Sword and Shield model. And there isn't one for the 3DS model. The 3DS model uses mouth textures. They didn't actually make a model for the mouth. But for the Sword and Shield model, they modeled out the mouth. And they also have the interior of the mouth inside right here. So since they modeled out the mouth, that means that they had to rework the mouth section. That increased the triangle count quite a bit. 5,368 for Sword and Shield. And for the 3DS model, we have 4,500 flat for the triangle count. So it's a lot more. And this is the most major change that I've found so far, is with Pikachu. Surprise, surprise, it's Pikachu. I don't think anyone should be surprised that Pikachu gets a bit of special treatment. Pikachu and Eevee also got similar touch-ups in their Let's Go models, but it's actually not the same. The models from Let's Go, Pikachu and Eevee, for Pikachu and Eevee, they actually had models for the eyes. They don't use textures alone for that. They actually had models for the eyes. The Sword and Shield Pikachu doesn't have that. They went back to textures for this. And if I were to do the thing again, select the 3DS model on the back, other than the mouth section being all out of whack, actually, let me do the reverse. So let me go ahead and select the Sword and Shield model and go from this side. You see more clearly that, the tongue. There we go. Other than the mouth section having some reworking done, everything else is perfectly aligned. They didn't redo the head other than the mouth. They didn't do the body again. They didn't do the tail. Everything's lined up other than the mouth. So even with this major rework to the mouth, literally everything except the mouth is identical. So yeah. Okay. So now there's a few special cases where the models actually did get a few changes that aren't just Pikachu. And for Glaceon, there's actually quite a bit of a significant change. It's not significant enough to actually influence the triangle counts, and in fact the entire topology of the mesh is the same, but they actually did move some things around, and I'll get into that. But if I were to select the mesh, go into edit mode, the triangle count is 4,718, and for the 3DS model, it's the same, 4,718. But if I were to go into side view, wireframe, you see that the ears for Glaceon are actually not in the same place. They don't line up. And it would appear to be because they had a revision pass on Glaceon. And there's actually good reason for this. I can show this. On the 3DS model, where the ears are, there's actually like a bulge right where the ears, the base of the ears are. There's like a bulge, and it's actually not that good. It's quite unpleasing to look at because it's inconsistent with the rest of the model. It's just like a huge bulge. So like if I were to, for my ear, if I were to place my ear further out and have like this huge hump on my head and have my ear here, that's kind of what this is. Not to that extreme, but it's kind of what that is. But for the Sword and Shield model, they actually smooth that out. There's no longer a hump here. So as a result, since they removed the hump, the ears got closer to the head, and that means that the ears no longer line up as shown here. Wireframe, they actually got pushed further towards the head. They didn't delete or add any new vertices. They just moved some things around. And that's going to be a theme for the rest of the models I'm going to be looking at here. For Sylveon's a very, very interesting case because of how insignificant it is, but there is a difference. In the 3DS model, and I actually double checked this actually is in the 3DS model, there's a stray vertice on Sylveon's bow, the head bow specifically. There's like a stray vertice that's just like that's just like here. It was there in the XY model, and I checked the Sun and Moon model as well, and it's still here. This stray vertice is still there. You can check for yourself if you have the files. It's still there. They didn't catch that until now. The Sword and Shield bow no longer has this stray vertice right here. Like it's everything's lined up now. It's not like poking out anymore. It's so insignificant because you would have never noticed this on the small 3DS screen, so it doesn't even really matter. It's only one vertice that's out of place. Everything else, literally everything else, is aligned, other than the stray vertice right here. Why is it doing that? There we go. Okay. Other than this, everything else is perfectly aligned. I find that really funny. They like screwed up and they didn't catch it until Sword and Shield. It's not a big deal. It's like one vertice that's out of place that you would have never noticed. But yeah, that's a revision pass. It's a change. It's not insignificant. It's very, very close to insignificant, but it's there. It's a change, I guess. Now for Pichu. Pichu's the last one I want to go over. And for Pichu actually did get a revision pass as well. The 3DS model in the back that I have selected in orange, the head is slightly higher. And for the Sword and Shield model, they actually pushed it down further. So that means that almost everything around the top of the head, including the ears, is just out of place. But the vertex count is still the same. Triangles, well, not vertex count, the triangle count, 3,764 for the 3DS model. Sword and Shield, 3,764. So again, they didn't add anything new. They didn't remove anything. They just moved some vertices around to make a shape that they were more happy with. So yeah, it's effectively the same model. It's just a few tweaks made. And I want to stress that very, very clearly for this. Except for Pikachu, every single one of these models are not significantly different. They're very, very close. And of course, other than Pikachu, they are basically the same exact model. Just with a few tweaks here and there where they moved some things around in a revision pass that they did. Who knows how long the actual approval process is for stuff like that. Who knows that the approval process for the minor tweaks like this might even be longer than actually doing the tweak itself, which might be why they could include every Pokemon. I don't know. It's a mess. It's a whole big mess. Unfortunately, I can't go over the rigging similarities or the animation similarities because at the moment, we're having trouble, at least me and my friend are having trouble extracting the armature from Sword and Shield for the models, so I can't compare them. But since the models are the same, it's to be expected that the rigs and the bone placements are likely not going to be that different either. But again, that's just speculation, even though I pretty much wholeheartedly believe that there's not going to be that many differences, just like what we've seen here. There's probably maybe a few different slight adjustments to some things here and there. But yeah. Oh, I forgot. Eevee. Eevee has some differences as well. Eevee did not retain the eye model and the mouth model from Let's Go. But the 3DS model on the back has a curved tail, and the Sword and Shield model's tail does not have a curved tail. And that also probably means that they had to reposition some of them bones to fit the straightened tail. So I can see why they did this. Again, the Vertex... the triangle count is not different. So if I were to select the Sword and Shield model, 4,934 triangles. They just move some things around. But generally, what you want out of a T-pose, which is basically like the default pose for the model, ideally what you want is a straight, neutral pose from the model. You don't want curves in the model that don't need to be there. So I can see why they made this change. It's just not curved anymore. I don't remember if Let's Go had this change. I don't remember. But the 3DS models didn't have the straight tail. The 3DS actually had a tail in the default pose. The Sword and Shield model does not. So that also probably implies that they had to make some changes to the animation because the bone placement's different. Those are just implications, though. Okay, what am I missing? Did I miss anything else? No, I don't think I did. Everything else that I said was the same is the same. So, yeah, and for the animations themselves, unfortunately, I can't compare the animations directly. I can't, go into the files and find the animation files and compare them. I have no way of pulling them up yet for the Sword and Shield game. I can for the 3DS, but not for Sword and Shield. But what I can do maybe in the future is do some animation comparisons once there's more footage of Sword and Shield out there. Do some side-by-side comparisons, check for timings in the animation. Timings is very important to check for similarities. In fact, probably the most important thing. If the timings for all the movements are the same, it's likely that the animation is the same. It can't account for minor tweaks, but it would prove that the animations are not significantly different either, which to an extent is already kind of proven, but I'll probably have to do more in-depth work on that to make that more of a satisfactory, of proof, I guess. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to go over. Basically, the models from Sword and Shield, they're not significantly different. Even Pikachu isn't significantly different. Pikachu just has a new mouth and nothing else in terms of the model itself. So, yeah. Unfortunately, no armatures, so that means I can't check Vertex Weights. I can't check bone placement. So, even though I do include those to be part of the model, I can't check that right now. So all I can check is the wireframe itself, which is part of the model. Models are not significantly different. The most significant changes, other than Pikachu, is some slight adjustments to positioning of some of the vertices. Like for Eevee, they straightened out the tail because that would be a more ideal T-pose. And they also had some modeling passes that aren't just related to the rig. They straightened out Glaceon's head shape. They made it less bulgy around the ear base. Sylvia had a straight vertice. Pichu had a shortened head. And that's about it, at least from what I found. I haven't looked at every model. I have not. That would take a lot of time to do in Blender. But yeah, I will have a link to all the model files that I've extracted so far, as well as the Blender file that I have open right now in the description, as well as if I'm posting this on Twitter as well. I'll probably post that into segments. I'll also have that linked in one of the text replies somewhere. You will be able to find it. I'll just have a link to it. So, yeah, if you want to look at the Blender scene and have a look at the assets I have looked at so far for yourself, you can. All the textures are there. All the models are there for Sword and Shield. Now, for my own opinion on this situation, so I'm pretty sure most of you already know, there's a trend that's trending right now that's called gamefreaklied. And I'm mostly on board with that. Pretty much I am, actually, but from that statement that people are quoting from Game Freak, Technically, when they said they were redoing models, they did specify Pokemon models. Based on the context, it probably is what they meant, but technically they didn't define Pokemon models. They could have meant other models, like the character models, or like models that aren't related to the Pokemon. Like, yeah, maybe it could have. If it was, they should have been more clear on that. It's still on them for not being very clear. It is still not good that they were vague, if that's the case. But if you ask me, the context would suggest that they meant the Pokemon models. So, yeah, it is not a good situation for them. And again, my own opinion on the game itself. I haven't played it yet, but from what I've seen, I'm not that impressed. It's very hand-holdy. There's a lot of streamlining, and in terms of like the mechanics, the XP share can be turned off. There's a lot of, like, again, hand-holding so that the game's very easy. It's just... yeah, it doesn't interest me that much. It's not what I play Pokemon for. The one thing I am interested in is, like, the competitive scene. Seeing the competitive scene with this limited amount of Pokemon would be interesting. I don't think it's a justified reason to remove Pokemon. They could have just had a regional dex rule set They could have just had a regional dex rule set to fulfill their needs to balance the game around, like, the regional dex. If they wanted to just do that, they didn't have to get rid of all the Pokemon. If that was one of the reasons, that's just a dumb reason. But I am interested in see how, like, the Smogon and VGC meta develops based on the limitations. Most of the single Smogons meta. VGC already had, like, regional dex limitations in the beginning of the game's release and stuff like that. It's not going to be as interesting there, but for Smogon singles and stuff like that, that'll be more interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops and seeing how Pokemon become a lot better with all these new power creeps, extremely powerful Pokemon leave the meta and stuff like that. That's like the one thing I'm interested in, and you don't even need the game to do it. You can just use Pokemon Showdown. So, again, there's just no reason to get the game for me. I'm probably not going to get it. So, yeah, that's just my opinion, though. That's just what I think. If you enjoy the game, if you buy the game and you enjoy the game, that's perfectly fine. I'm not one of those dickheads. That's no way to put it. That likes to, like, look down upon you and say, "Why did you buy the game? The game is shit. Don't do." I don't know. It's just, that's pretty petty to me. And no, if you enjoy the game, that's fine. It just doesn't interest me, and I just want to express why at the end of this video. So anyway, now that's it for me, and that's it for the video. So I will see you guys later. I might do a video later on comparing animations. Maybe. We'll see if I have time. I'm pretty freaking busy this month, so probably not this month. I'm not sure about next month either. Might be busy next month too. I have things to catch up on. I barely had enough time to do this as it is, so yeah. That's it. I will see you guys later.